The term culture is an extremely broad one. Each country, town, or even family has customs that they follow. Merriam-Webster defines culture as the set of values, conventions, or social practices associated with a particular field, activity, or societal characteristic. What one group of people considers as their culture could be very different from another group's. For instance, in South Korea, it's generally considered an insult to tip someone for a service. However, in many other parts of the world, it's completely normal, and at times expected. I'm bringing this up because culture is an extremely important factor in video games. The country that the game is developed in is bound to have a large influence on the finished product. So naturally, since many games are made in Japan, it's fair to say that they typically consist Japanese values, and that's cool. You can learn interesting and intimate details about this place that you've never been to. But sometimes, it would be better if a tradition from another country stayed in that country. Xenoblade X was released in Japan in late April 2015, several months before the rest of the world. X is considered the black sheep of the franchise these days because it's not very good. Oh, I can't say that. I'll get in trouble if I leave that in. X is considered the black sheep of the franchise these days because of the focus on exploration rather than story. Back then, though, it was just the next game in the series. Previously, I had sort of resigned myself to the fact that Xenoblade was just going to be a one-off game and that was it. But no, here was a sequel. It was out. For over 2 years, Xenoblade fans were chomping at the bit to get this new game, and while X only released in one region at that point, we at least had seemingly endless information about the game now. Gone were the days of analyzing trailers. If we had questions or concerns about something, we could just look to someone who had it, or import it ourselves. It was an exciting time to be a fan. People were constantly noticing little nods to the first game and sharing their finds online. In the months leading up to the international release, Nintendo took that time to localize the game. And honestly, I cannot blame them. This game is absolutely massive. As the release date drew nearer, review copies and leaked ISOs began circulating. Some eagle-eyed fans were starting to notice some of the alterations. Out of the localized content, there were some changes in particular that were talked about ad nauseum. 2 to be exact. I'll go over the simplest one first. Xenoblade X is unique in the sense that, out of the whole series, it's the only one with a silent and customizable avatar character. This is likely due to the decision to give the game multiplayer online functionality. You can group up and fight bosses together. I guess they wanted everyone to be able to look different. The community calls them Cross, but they don't actually have an official name. Either way, you can customize Cross at the beginning of your adventure with a very broad range of options. In the Japanese version only, the female avatars are actually able to adjust their bust size. That's right, this was one of the removed features. Now, I know a lot of people were confused about this, and all things considered, it doesn't seem like it really should have mattered, but from what I can tell, they might have needed to do this to get a lower ESRB and PEGI rating. As someone who is in fact not a woman, I can say that it didn't bother me too much past the thought of, "Aw darn, I can't give my avatar massive bazongas." But I think, oddly enough, the opinions of people who actually identify as women are being talked about much less. From what I've been able to gather, there's a decent chunk of women who genuinely wish they could have altered the avatar's bust size to better represent themselves. The comments on this Reddit post in particular have always stood out to me. The only one I'm bothered by is the removal of the bust slider. I prefer my characters with small breasts, as I myself am an A cup. I know it's not going to change my overall enjoyment of the game, but I would have at least liked the option. Like others have said, the only one that really bothers me is the removal of the bust slider. I'd like to make a female avatar that looks like myself, and my breasts aren't that large. It's such a weird thing to remove, and I can't understand why when all the outfits in the game are still uncensored. This makes complete sense to me. I think many people imagine a bust slider and picture it only going up, but this new default setting has it sitting right in the middle, and I'm not surprised that the removal of this option could bother women who want a smaller breast size. Or, women who have larger breasts also exist and would want to represent themselves as well. According to a recent survey that I put out along with Signet, the amount of non-men that have seemingly played Xenoblade is staggeringly low, on top of the fact that more than half of these respondents said that they never even played Xenoblade X, so I doubt that the opinions of women on this matter have really been heard. For all of you boob havers out there, what do you think of this change? Let me know in the comments. While unfortunate, this issue was, by comparison, much less contentious than the other one we're going to discuss. Now, in order to do that, we need to talk about Lin. Lin Li Ku, also known as Linley in the Japanese version, is one of the main party members in Xenoblade X. She's an incredibly important and interesting character in the story. Lin is required to be in your party, along with Elma, in order to start each chapter of the main quest. You might know her from all of the not funny Tatsu jokes. What you may not know, if you haven't played the game, is that Lin is 13. This makes her the youngest party member in X, and one of the youngest in the series. This is very important to keep in mind, because one of the changes made in the international release of X is that they censored her outfits. Yeah, so in Japan, this 13-year-old girl is able to be put in these extremely skimpy and revealing outfits. In Japan, this is something that's more common since the age of consent is a shockingly low 13, and it's been that way for a long time. Japan's age of consent laws have not changed since 1947. This law is extremely complex and has a ton of exceptions, which I'm just not going to go into for this video. Just know that it's complicated enough for this problematic chart to exist. Looks like a frickin' Pokemon type matchup chart. I'm not gonna sit here and say everyone in Japan is okay with this though. For years, citizens have campaigned to get the age raised to no avail. Luckily, many cities have enacted local statutes that raise the age from 13 to anywhere from 16 to 18. Regardless, this almost 100-year-old law has had a profound impact on Japanese culture. It's somewhat normalized the consumption of lolicon media and other related genres, which all involve very young children. I want to make it abundantly clear that most people in Japan are not okay with this type of content. However, it is something you're more likely to see over there. Wouldn't you know it, one of the first videos I make after getting monetized, and this is what I choose to talk about. Anyway, that is the reason why Lin is dressed like this in the Japanese version. Understandably, localizers from Nintendo of America and 8.4 saw this and said, "No way, Jose," and decided to censor the more revealing outfits. People also didn't like that 8.4 was assisting on this game. They've been accused of over-censoring games they've worked on. From this discovery, there became several vocal factions during discussion. Even people who didn't play Xenoblade were commenting on the situation. There were obviously those who didn't care or were happy about the changes, but there were many that were upset about them somehow. Some people were upset about the way it was censored, like in terms of the aesthetics of the new outfits. They didn't like how lazy the censorship looked. Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense. That's fair. I don't personally feel that way. I think these look fine, but it's okay to have an opinion about fashion. There were some people, though, that were just upset that changes got made in general. There are varying weird reasons why, and I am not going to dignify those with a response, but the most prominent, grounded argument seemed to be that they did not like that there was any kind of censorship in the game. It seemed like they didn't want the developers' original interpretation of the game to be altered. Whatever Monolith created is what they wanted to play, which I agree with, but not in this situation, not this one. This is a 13-year-old child. Come on. You could easily apply this argument to the language and be like, hey Nintendo, do not translate the game from Japanese to another language. Some meaning could be lost there. I don't want to play a game without the same exact words. There was also this rumor going around that Lyn was being aged up to 15 in the international release. I have no clue where this came from, but for a good amount of time, people treated it like fact. News sites everywhere were reporting this, and they seemed to be quoting this Game Informer article. It eventually became apparent that this was not the case, but at that point, combating the misinformation was an uphill battle. To clarify, as far as I'm aware, Lyn was always 13. In the Japanese version, she's 13, and in the international version, she's 13. Either way, enough people believed this and did not like this change either. To them, this was censorship and there was no justification for it. The complaining got so bad that eventually 8chaners got involved. 8chan is essentially an alt-right 4chan. This post made on 8chan suggests a detailed plan to bombard Nintendo of Japan with letters demanding that they end their censorship of American products. I'm blurring a vast majority of this image because this person uses a lot of hurtful words that I don't feel comfortable broadcasting. This is absolute overkill. Lyn is a 13-year-old child, and to this day, it baffles me that there were people staunchly in denial of the fact that these outfits might not be appropriate. I am well aware of the complexities of having fictional characters with real-world ages applied to them, and I'm not going to claim to have a right opinion either. What I will say is that if I hypothetically had a daughter at 13 and she was wearing something like this in a public setting, I would 100% not be okay with this. I think it would have just been helpful if someone that made the game like Tetsuya Takahashi weighed in. You know, that way people could see it through his perspective and understand his thinking on the subject. Huh? Oh, would you look at that? He did comment on it. Although it was 2 years later, the executive director of the game made his thoughts known. This title is extremely telling already. I didn't mind much at all. I'm not going to read the entire article because that would just be boring, but I will read the most compelling parts for you. Takahashi is quoted as saying, "I do realize there is a cultural difference between what Japanese people think and what the rest of the world thinks." And he later says, "I think what's important is that we make sure that the end user who actually plays the game doesn't have a bad experience. If that change is going to help alleviate that, then I think we should definitely make it." Genki Yokota, another director on the game, had this to say, "It's like we're all aiming for the same goal, of being able to provide a good experience for everybody in all regions, and we're aiming to have a game that has very little difference between the regions. So any and all claims that have been made about the game's artistic vision or whatever Monolith wanted being changed just don't apply. They were fine with it. You know who else was fine with it? Cassandra Lee Morris, Lyn's English VA. She goes over her thoughts on it in this video on her channel.
Honestly, it makes me cringe a little bit because she's only 13 years old. Those skimpy outfits were removed for the North American and European versions. People are calling it censorship. I really see it as localization. There are a lot of cultural differences between Japan and the US and Europe. I personally don't mind that Lyn's outfits were changed for the US version. My hope is that players will really be able to concentrate on Lyn's abilities and what she can bring to your game and what she can do for the other members of her party and not just how she looks.
Cassandra herself does not believe this to be censorship. the person who plays the character. What more could you really need to hear? All of this contention and ire was because of this one little girl. It's crazy to go back and look at the release of this game and see how angry people got over these changes. I can safely assume that Nintendo did not anticipate backlash of this caliber being directed at Xenoblade X. Unfortunately, whether we like it or not, this is the world we live in. Localization is going to happen. It's a side effect of doing business on the national scale. Some cultures are different from others. We don't need to like these facts, but we should come to accept them. Because if we don't, I would hate to see what people have to say about any other Xenoblade character getting a design change like this. Wait a minute, oh shit.